Tensions at the Strait of Hormuz have flared up again after a brief reprieve on Friday. This as Israel acknowledges it's carried out numerous strikes on Lebanon despite the ceasefire there. And the ceasefire between the US and Iran may not be renewed as talks between those two countries remain uncertain. Joining us now is Barbara Lee, former US ambassador to the UAE and former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Barbara, it's good to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me on the show, Nivrita.
How are you viewing the diplomatic progress being made in this conflict at this stage? Because we're nearly 50 days in, and it seems like any step forward is reversed almost immediately.
Well, that's right. And that's just simply going to be the course of this, what I think is going to be a very torturous effort to get to a landing spot where you can have a sound and durable agreement, even if only a framework agreement between the US and Iran, and an agreement to sort of push a couple of other issues to the side for more prolonged negotiations, which for the nuclear set of issues, I think is almost certainly what the administration would have to do. But the uncertainty, instability, volatility, yeah, this is par for the course.
There are so many parts to this, but I want to ask you about Lebanon first, because we are seeing a new humanitarian crisis unfold there. Thousands killed, over 1 million people displaced. Now, we did see both countries agree to this 10-day ceasefire, but we've seen some violations. And Israel's offensive, both air and ground, against Hezbollah there, it has seemed at times to be at odds with the US's diplomatic efforts in the region. Is that fair to say?
Well, I would say that that tension came into sharp focus here over the last week, and with the extraordinary statements by the President Trump, essentially publicly imposing a ceasefire on Israel. Now, there's room for self-defense, of course, and that appears to be what precipitated Israeli action today. On the other hand, Hezbollah killed a French UNIFIL officer. So that too is a somewhat fragile ceasefire. All that said, I think the real stability to that front rests with whether or not negotiations actually take place between Washington and the US, or they fray and conflict resumes.
All right, to your point, we do have that temporary ceasefire also in effect between the US and Iran, and that's set to end next week. What are you seeing as the main sticking points in those talks? I know you mentioned, the nuclear bit. Are you optimistic that we'll see those being resolved and the ceasefire being extended?
Well, I was a little bit more optimistic yesterday morning, but very measured optimism. I don't indulge in giddy optimism these days, unlike some of the markets. Because look, even though Foreign Minister Araghchi announced that the strait was open completely, it was clear immediately that it was not by the Iran's own statements stipulating that all ships had to transit through their new zone of coordination. And that precipitated, I think, in any case, the president announced, even as he said, yes, the strait is open, he immediately followed with, but the US blockade is still in force. So it took some hours until you saw what was pretty predictable, which was that the Iranians said, okay, the strait is not open, it's closed. So, the president has threatened he'll resume strikes, but I think it's fair to say that the economic pressures are profound on the non-Iranian side. And when I say non-Iranian, I include the whole global set of countries that are being severely impacted by this continuing closure.
The U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, is leading these negotiations with Iran, along with the U.S. President's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Are these the right people to be negotiating with Iran? And I ask this because, unlike yourself, they are not seasoned diplomats.
Look, I think what it requires on the US side, it's not so much that you have to have a career person negotiating. I mean, you could, but it's rather that your side of the table is fully staffed with expertise. And that's not just from the State Department, that's from the Department of Treasury for sanctions issue. That's a set of lawyers from several different agencies. You want to have it fully staffed with experts in all the issues, the nuclear issues, but also regional experts that can provide the substantive backing to the principals, whoever leads the negotiations, whether it's Secretary Rubio or the Vice President. They need to have the support of people who really know the details in a granular fashion. And this is what the Iranians had on their side of the table. So I did feel that Islamabad was very unbalanced in terms of the support that our side could draw on. And I hope that's something that they will correct in the days ahead.
What should be the order of priority for these U.S. negotiators when it comes to their objectives in Iran? Because, is it the Strait? Is it the nuclear deal, which we know took years to come up with before Trump threw it out? I know regime change is something that the U.S. president spoke of quite a bit initially, less so now. He did mention it today. What should be the priority, and what tools are available then to the U.S. delegation to be using, what can they be using to achieve these objectives there?
So, when the president has consistently really in recent days only talked about two issues, he's returned to the nuclear deal, the nuclear issues over and over again. And he has also, of course, cited the Strait of Hormuz, although it was clear 10, 12 days earlier, he really wanted other people to fix that. He did not want that to be on the U.S. side. But I think it's well understood now that we have no choice but to use whatever means we can, including at the negotiating table, to get the Strait open. So I would say just with these two issues, there is critical and there is urgent. Getting the Strait opened is both critical and urgent. Every day that passes brings new pain, now not just in price shocks, but in actual shortages, jet fuel, for instance, cooking oil, fertilizers for, which can trigger food insecurity. But then there is the nuclear issue, which is critical, but it's not urgent. In other words, it can and must have enough time devoted to it along a set of technical discussions to ensure that we get all the pieces right and that the Iranians are once again under a very strict and intrusive inspection regime. That's unlikely to be agreed in the course of a couple of days of negotiations. And then you've got the other issues which have figured, the ballistic missiles, the proxies and so forth. But those, again, given their battered state, they may be important for the long run, no doubt, but they're not urgent. Strait of Hormuz is urgent.
All right, Barbara, we leave it there for now, but thank you. Always appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
That is former U.S. Ambassador Barbara Leaf.